Still, 2017 seems to be off to a good start for Chinese brewers. First half profit for China Resources Beer, the owner of the Snow brand, almost doubled from a year ago. For more, let's bring in Stephen Beaumont, co-author of the World Atlas of Beer. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
So give us an idea, how are China's local breweries performing at the moment?
Well, they're coming off of a few challenging years. China was in growth mode for the longest time, coming from almost nowhere over the matter of decades to become the world's #1 producer by a long shot. So I don't think the big breweries, the China Resources, Tsingtao, Yangjing, were quite ready for the drop-off in consumption. And that took them a bit by surprise. Of course, China Resources was buoyed slightly by getting full control over its business once SAB-Miller had to sell half of it back to that company.
And Stephen, what are some of the more interesting beer trends that you're seeing in China?
Well, I think the most interesting one is happening at the very, very small brewery level, and that is the use of more Chinese ingredients. China is not a huge producer of hops, and those hops that it is producing are what's known as alpha hops. They're for bitterness and for preservative content. They're not really meant for flavor and aroma. That's subtly changing now, and you see smaller breweries encouraging the growth of more flavorful and aromatic hops. Also, we're seeing TCM herbs used in beer for bittering purposes as well, which I find really fascinating.
And it's definitely interesting seeing the different flavors that people are interested in. And we know that China is the world's largest market for alcohol. A portion of that comes from beer. So how are tastes different, say, for beer drinkers in China versus, say, the US or other regions in the world?
Well, the funny thing is, the general taste in beer in China is not that different from the general taste in beer in the United States. There's a study I read several years back that came up with the number, I think it was somewhere around 75 to 80% of beer drinkers actually don't like the taste of beer. So they tend to go for very light-bodied beers because of that social aspect of drinking a beer with their friends. #1 selling beer in the United States is Bud Light, and that's by a long shot. And that's a very light tasting beer, not quite as light as Snow, but relatively speaking in that same area.
So how lucrative are foreign brewers when it comes to China's market?
Well, it's a very difficult market for foreign brewers to go in on their own. The key seems to be to find a Chinese partner to access the market with. If you go back 2-3 decades, the original breweries from the West who were trying to make headway into the United States, they failed because trying to make headway into China. They failed because they failed to pick up a Chinese partner to operate with. I think this was one of the keys to SAB-Miller's success in partnering with China Resources. So that, I think, is one of the big things. But it's a difficult market. You need to have help to navigate it. As a foreign brewer, you have to keep your prices low because the domestic beers, the profit margins are razor thin.
Now, on the flip side, we know that China's best-selling beer outside the country is Tsingtao. So here in the US, for example, you can find that in pretty much any restaurant that's serving Chinese food. Do you see Chinese beer becoming more popular with Western countries?
Not really. I think the problem is that the beer market globally is very saturated these days. So for a brand that is trying to make an impact globally right now, they really have to have something unique about them, whether that's something unique on the marketing side or something unique on the flavor side. It's a very difficult landscape to try to take a light-tasting lager into and make a global impact at this point.
So being that it is such a crowded market, what are some of the strategies or perhaps marketing methods that Chinese brands could adopt to attract some more of these foreign consumers?
Well, obviously, the food connection is a big one. It's worked very well for the Japanese breweries coming into the West, with pairing with Japanese food, making that food and beer connection. As you say, there are a lot of Chinese restaurants in North America. Even if not a lot of them have a lot to do with true Chinese food, there's still that market there to say, hey, here is a Chinese beer that is new to you that will go nicely with your food. I think that's a really interesting angle that they could pursue.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen Beaumont, co-author of the World Atlas of Beer.